The excavation ship descended through purple clouds that covered Avalon 7 like a shroud, while Dr. Maya Sullivan watched her instruments show readings that made no sense, because the sealed chamber below pulsed with energy that should have died centuries ago, yet somehow continued burning like a star trapped in stone. The Galactic Council had spent fortunes to find this place, after their historians discovered fragments of records speaking about a weapon that ended the First Galactic War in mere days, and now they believed they had found it buried beneath crystalline seals that hummed with power, despite 1,238 years of abandonment. Maya felt unease growing in her stomach as her team prepared plasma cutters, because the warnings carved into every surface were not just words but somehow reached directly into her mind, with images of burning skies and dying worlds that felt more like memories than threats. Deep beneath the seals, Lisa Blackwood stirred for the first time in ages as her consciousness rose from dreams where she flew beside dragons through stars that welcomed their children home before the corruption began, that would eventually birth the tyranny now approaching her sanctuary. Her violet eyes opened slowly while her pointed ears detected vibrations that meant the outer world was forcing its way inside. Despite all the protections laid down by heroes who understood that some things should remain sleeping until the galaxy was ready to remember what it had chosen to forget. Beside her, the massive form of shadow men shifted as scales of midnight blue rippled with inner light, while the dragon tested muscles that had not moved in centuries but remained strong because their sleep had been more than rest, but rather a gathering of power for this moment. Lisa rose from her crystalline bed with grace that defied the centuries of stillness, while her hand touched the warm scales of her companion, whose mind merged with hers in a bond older than most civilizations and stronger than any force that might try to break them apart. The plasma cutters began their work on the outer seals, and each strike sent ripples through the chamber that made ancient defense systems activate, with mechanical precision because the builders had known this day would come, when someone would seek power without understanding the price. Maya watched her readings spike beyond anything her training had prepared her for, while around her, the excavation team reported strange visions of flying creatures and silver warriors that seemed to bypass their eyes entirely and speak directly to something deeper than conscious thought. Inside the chamber, Lisa stood to her full height and raised her arms, as silver threads materialized from quantum foam itself to weave armor around her body that had been worn in battles across dimensions, when the galaxy had been younger and trust between species had not yet been poisoned by fear. Shadow Men spread his wings to their full span while his eyes blazed with inner fire that had consumed entire fleets in ages past, when dragons flew freely through space, and their riders were welcomed as protectors rather than feared as threats by those who had forgotten the old alliances. 20 seals remained between the council team and the inner chamber, but Lisa knew they would not hold much longer against modern technology wielded by those who sought power for its own sake, rather than wisdom to use. Well, because that was the curse of civilizations that forgot their history. She placed both hands on Shadow Men's neck and felt their pulses synchronize while energy flowed through channels carved into the chamber floor in patterns that told the story of bonds forged in starlight between species who chose cooperation over conquest, until the slow rot set in. The archaeological team broke through another seal, and light flooded inward while soldiers in power armor moved into defensive positions because they expected resistance, even though their briefings had assured them this was merely recovery of ancient technology from a dead civilization. Lisa smiled with sadness at their preparations because they could not know that what waited in this chamber was not a weapon in any sense they would understand, but rather living memory of what the galaxy had lost when it chose control over freedom and fear over trust. Through Shadow Men's enhanced perception, she saw the truth written in quantum foam itself, showing how humanity had been systematically weakened over centuries by laws that seemed protective, but were actually chains designed to prevent them from achieving the potential that had once saved all species. The dragon shared memories of battles fought beside human warriors whose creativity and chaos had found solutions, where logic saw only defeat, while their children now labored in factories and died in wars that served masters who had forgotten the debts they owed to Earth's children. Maya Sullivan felt her hands shaking as another seal shattered because something about this felt wrong, in ways her scientific mind could not articulate, but her instincts screamed warnings that her team was about to unleash forces that should have remained buried forever. Inside, Lisa prepared for what must come next, while Shadow Men gathered power that sparked along his scales because they both knew that violence would likely follow their awakening as the galaxy had changed during their sleep and would not welcome reminders of what it had chosen to forget. The final outer seal cracked with sound like thunder, while bright lights from the excavation equipment flooded the antechamber and revealed hieroglyphs that shifted and changed as observers watched because the symbols existed partially outside normal spacetime. Maya stepped forward, despite every instinct telling her to run, because scientific curiosity overcame fear as she traced patterns that seemed familiar even though no human had ever seen this language before. Yet somehow her mind could almost grasp meanings that danced just beyond comprehension. Lisa felt the moment approaching when centuries of waiting would end and choices made in ages past would finally bear fruit as the seals fell one by one, despite all protections, because some prophecies created their own fulfillment through the actions of those who sought to prevent them. The Council soldiers reported increasing equipment malfunctions as their targeting systems refused to lock onto something. Their sensors insisted was there, while their commanders demanded explanations for readings that showed 2 life forms, with energy outputs that exceeded most starship reactors. Through the thinning barriers, Lisa reached out with senses trained in dimensions where thought became reality, and touched the minds of those approaching to find fear mixed with greed and ambition, but also surprising seeds of doubt in some who wondered if they served worthy masters. Shadowman rumbled deep in his chest with sound that vibrated through dimensions, causing the very air to shimmer while his tail swept patterns in the dust that had accumulated over centuries despite the chamber being sealed because time itself moved strangely in this place. The last seal between outer and inner chamber began to crack, while Lisa stood ready with Shadowmen beside her to face whatever came next, knowing that the galaxy needed reminders of what it had been before the slow conquest of bureaucracy replaced the chaos of freedom. Maya Sullivan would later swear she heard singing as the final barrier fell away, and light met light in explosion of colors that had no names, while 2 figures emerged from the ancient chamber with presence that made hardened soldiers drop their weapons and fall to their knees. Lisa Blackwood stepped into the modern galaxy, with movements that flowed like water, while beside her, Shadowmend lowered his great head to study these small beings who had forgotten so much yet still carried within them sparks of the greatness their ancestors had shown. The awakening was complete, and the sealed chamber stood open, while its guardians prepared to restore what had been lost because the children of Earth needed their ancient allies even if they had forgotten the songs that once called dragons from between the stars. The Council had sought a weapon, but found instead judges who would weigh their actions against promises made in starlight when all species stood equal and find them wanting, because power without justice was merely tyranny. Wearing different clothes, Lisa looked at the frightened faces before her and spoke in languages that predated the Council by millennia, while her words carried memories of better times when diversity was strength and chaos was recognized as the birthplace of innovation. The galaxy would never be the same because the sealed chamber had opened and what emerged was not death but hope wrapped in scales and silver light, ready to remind the stars themselves that some oaths transcended time and some bonds could never truly be broken. Admiral Tara Mitchell stood on the bridge of her flagship watching the emergency transmission from Avalon 7 with growing alarm because the images showed something that should not exist yet. The biometric data confirmed 2 life forms had emerged from the sealed chamber with energy signatures that defied classification. The excavation team had gone silent after that final transmission, showing a dragon larger than a shuttlecraft and a humanoid female with pointed ears whose eyes blazed violet in the darkness, while around them, Council soldiers lay unconscious but breathing as if they had simply chosen to sleep. Lisa Blackwood walked through the excavation camp studying the technology that had evolved during her slumber, while Shadowmend flew overhead tasting the air of a galaxy that had changed in ways that made his ancient heart heavy with understanding of what had been lost to fear and control. She accessed the data systems with thoughts alone because elven magic and technology were not separate things but different expressions of will upon reality, while the information she found painted a picture of systematic oppression disguised as protective guidance for humanity's own good. The records showed human colonies restricted to barely habitable worlds while their children were taken for special education that turned brilliant minds into obedient servants, and their warriors died in conflicts that enriched other species who had forgotten the blood debt they owed to. Earth Shadowmend landed beside her with ground-shaking impact and shared what he had sensed in the quantum currents that flowed between stars, showing a galaxy wrapped in invisible chains of law and regulation that prevented any species from achieving true potential lest they threaten Council control. Lisa set course for New Phoenix Colony in a borrowed shuttle while her dragon companion flew through space itself, because the laws of physics were suggestions to beings who had learned to navigate dimensions where thought and reality merged into possibilities beyond measurement. The journey gave her time to process the horror of what 12 centuries had wrought as humanity went from equal partners in galactic civilization to barely tolerated laborers whose creativity was feared rather than celebrated by masters who preferred predictable servants to chaotic innovators. New Phoenix sprawled across continents that should have bloomed with life, but instead showed scars of strip mining and toxic waste, while the human population clustered in gray cities surrounded by walls that kept them in, rather than keeping dangers out. She landed outside the settlement and immediately felt the weight of despair that pressed down on this place, like fog, until she noticed the hidden signs of rebellion in graffiti, using symbols from old Earth and secret caches of weapons built from scavenged parts and desperate hope. Amy Foster watched the stranger approach through her rifle scope from her position in the ruins and nearly dropped her weapon when she realized this was no council inspector, but something from the stories her grandmother whispered when surveillance was offline and dreams were still allowed. The young woman emerged from cover with weapon raised but hands trembling, because everything about this visitor radiated power beyond anything the council possessed. Yet those violet eyes held compassion rather than the cold calculation she had learned to expect from authority. Lisa spoke in ancient English with accents that belonged to ages when humans flew between stars as equals rather than slaves, while her words carried weight that transcended sound to resonate directly with genetic memories buried but not destroyed by generations of oppression. She told Amy of the draconic compact sealed in starlight between humanity and the elder races when the galaxy was young, and threats from beyond required unity between species who chose cooperation over conquest until the slow poison of bureaucracy replaced trust with control. Amy listened with growing wonder as Lisa explained how humans had been the bridge between dimensions that allowed elves to manifest physically, while dragons found in human chaos the perfect complement to their ordered power, creating balance that had saved countless worlds. The resistance fighter led Lisa through hidden passages to the underground chamber, where 30 brave souls planned operations against their oppressors, despite knowing the council response would be swift and brutal, because some things were worth dying for, even when victory seemed impossible. Lisa allowed her true nature to shine through the dimensional barriers, and the chamber filled with silver, light that carried memories of humanity standing proud among the stars, while several older members wept at seeing symbols their families had preserved through centuries of careful secret keeping. She spoke of Shadowmend waiting beyond the settlement, and led them outside where the dragon landed with earthquake force yet gentle precision, while lowering his great head to acknowledge these children of Earth who had kept faith, despite everything trying to break their spirits. Amy stepped forward, first with courage that impressed even beings who had seen heroes rise and fall across ages, while her hand touched scales warm as summer, despite the cold night air, and Shadowmen shared visions of her ancestors riding dragons into battle. The elf warrior drew ancient symbols in the air that blazed with power undimmed by time, and declared the renewal of bonds that predated the council by millennia, while around them space itself sang in recognition of oaths upheld, despite seeming impossibility. Word spread through quantum channels the resistance thought compromised, but which actually operated on frequencies the council could not perceive, because their technology had stagnated under bureaucracy, while innovation required the chaos they had tried to eliminate. Within hours, every free human knew the old allies had returned, and hope spread faster than council censors could suppress, because some truths were too powerful to contain once released, and the promise of freedom burned brighter than fear of punishment. Lisa began planning with the Resistance leadership while Shadowman destroyed surveillance satellites with casual sweeps of his tail, sending clear messages that the old order faced challenge from powers that existed before their rules and would exist long after their tyranny crumbled. The Council response came as a full battle fleet emerged from hyperspace with weapons charging and demands for surrender of terrorists, harboring dangerous fugitives whose very existence threatened the peace and stability of civilized space according to their twisted definitions. Admiral Mitchell studied her tactical display showing one dragon and one humanoid, facing enough firepower to crack continents while her officers awaited orders to begin bombardment that would turn New Phoenix into glass and end this rebellion before it could spread. But something was wrong with her targeting systems, as they refused to lock onto enemies that existed partially outside normal spacetime. While her crew reported growing unease that had nothing to do with battle fear and everything to do with recognition of justice, Denied Lisa smiled, knowing the Admiral felt the conflict between duty and truth, because neural inhibitors could only suppress so much before human nature reasserted itself, demanding freedom that was birthright rather than privilege, granted by those who had forgotten their own chains. The moment stretched as two philosophies faced each other across the void, with one representing control through fear and firepower, while the other offered chaos and creativity and the dangerous promise that beings could choose their own paths without permission. Shadowman spread his wings, casting shadows that fell across dimensions, while his presence reminded the galaxy that some powers transcended technology and bureaucracy, because they arose from connections between consciousness that recognized no authority but freely given loyalty. The Resistance fighters stood, ready to die for the dream of freedom, while above them dragons flew once more through skies that had forgotten their song, but would learn again that hope had wings and courage had claws, and justice would not sleep forever. Lisa felt the weight of centuries pressing down as she prepared for what must come, because the Council would not yield without violence. But she had not waited 1,200 years to fail now, when humanity needed reminders of what they could become. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as ancient power faced modern tyranny, while on 1,000 worlds humans felt something stirring in their blood that whispered of times when they had been more than servants and would be again, if they could find the courage. The war for humanity's soul was about to begin, and Lisa Blackwood stood ready with Shadowmen beside her to remind the galaxy that some debts could never be forgotten, and some bonds could never be broken no matter how many centuries passed. The Council fleet powered weapons while the dragon gathered antimatter in his throat, and an elf warrior who had seen empires rise and fall prepared to teach modern tyrants why their ancestors had feared to wake what slept in sealed chambers. The future balanced on the edge of violence while hope and despair wrestled for the hearts of those who watched, because this moment would determine whether humanity would remain slaves or remember they were born to fly between stars as equals, with any who dared claim superiority. Amy Foster raised her weapon alongside her fellow rebels while above them, cosmic forces prepared to clash, and the fate of billions hung in the balance between order that meant slavery and chaos that meant freedom with all its terrible, beautiful possibilities. The first Council dreadnought died in absolute silence as Shadowmen passed through its shields like morning mist, while his breath revealed itself as controlled antimatter that unraveled molecular bonds with surgical precision, turning the mighty warship into expanding clouds of basic elements, returning to the Void Commander. Kate Ramirez watched from the bridge of the Defiant Hope, hidden in the asteroid field called the Broken Chain, when her sensors detected the impossible as one dragon systematically destroyed the most powerful fleet the Council had assembled in 500 years of unchallenged dominance. Lisa rode between Shadowmen's wings, surrounded by silver light that bent energy beams around them, while she wove protections existing in dimensions the Council weapons could not reach because their technology had grown stagnant under bureaucratic control that feared innovation more than defeat. The dragon selected targets with ancient wisdom, understanding that fear spread faster than death as each destroyed ship broadcast its final moments to sister vessels, whose crews realized their mighty fleet was being torn apart by a single creature they had dismissed as Myth Admiral. Mitchell ordered full retreat after losing 7 dreadnoughts in as many minutes, but her hyperspace engines refused to engage. while an alien presence touched her mind with infinite sadness, showing her visions of human children dying in council factories, after working until their bodies simply gave out. The visions continued showing generations of humans bred for specific tasks like livestock, while their natural creativity was suppressed through neural conditioning that began in infancy, because the council had learned to fear the chaos that once saved the galaxy from threats beyond imagination. Kate Ramirez made the choice that would echo through history, ordering the defiant Hope from hiding to join the battle, even though her single cruiser stood no chance in conventional combat. But she understood some moments demanded bearing witness regardless of practical outcomes. Lisa sensed the human warship emerging and directed Shadowmen to provide cover while she reached through quantum channels touching minds of humans, serving on council vessels where neural inhibitors fought against ancestral memories of freedom that no technology could completely erase. Throughout the council fleet, human crew members began experiencing cascading failures in their obedience, conditioning as genetic memories surfaced with images of dragons flying alongside their ancestors and elven warriors teaching humans to navigate dimensions where thought became reality and will shaped destiny. Shadowmen flew close enough to the defiant Hope that Kate could see Lisa clearly through the viewport, and the elf warrior saluted with respect that transcended species while around them, council ships drifted powerless after their human crew members disabled weapons rather than fire on their own kind. The quantum realm revealed deeper horrors as Lisa dove into the underlying structure of council control, discovering parasitic code woven through command protocols that operated below conscious awareness, shaping decisions toward outcomes that served hunger rather than governance or justice. She shared this discovery with Shadowmen, whose rage transformed from hot fury to cold determination because they both recognized signatures of entities they had fought before, in spaces between realities where consciousness became food for things that existed only to consume and grow. Dr. Holly Chen had hidden her brilliance for 30 years working as a menial technician in a council research facility. But now she stood in her secret laboratory reviewing data streams Lisa had unlocked, showing the full scope of parasitic infiltration throughout council leadership. The young scientist understood immediately why humans had been oppressed rather than eliminated, because their chaotic neural patterns created interference preventing clean parasitic integration, while their unpredictable creativity threatened to expose the slow conquest proceeding behind democratic facades. Lisa materialized in the laboratory through dimensional folding that bypassed all security measures, finding Holly already working on solutions with intelligence that had been suppressed but never extinguished, because human minds found ways to grow even in the smallest spaces of freedom together. They began crafting weapons that existed as much in thought as physical reality, while Shadowmen continued his systematic destruction of council military assets, with each victory broadcast across the galaxy on channels the oppressors could not block because dragon speech traveled through dimensions. The parasites responded by accelerating their plans as planet-killer weapons emerged from hidden arsenals, aimed at every human colony in a final solution that would eliminate the chaotic element threatening their careful control over a galaxy they had been slowly consuming for centuries. Lisa felt the temporal strain as she prepared to fragment her consciousness across multiple probability streams while Shadowmen gathered power that had been building for 12 centuries of sleep, where dreams became reservoirs of potential waiting for this moment of greatest need. The multiplication began as they split their essence through quantum mechanics that should have been impossible. But love and duty transcended physics, allowing them to appear simultaneously at every threatened world. As Dragonfire met extinction weapons in the void, each fragmented presence carried full power of the original as Shadowmen turned planet killers into expanding gardens of crystalline beauty that would orbit human worlds as monuments to attempted genocide that failed. Because some bonds were stronger than the mathematics of destruction, Kate Ramirez coordinated with resistance cells across human space as the truth about parasitic control spread like wildfire, with species who had been enemies for generations. Suddenly understanding their conflicts had been orchestrated to feed entities that saw suffering as sustenance. The revelation shattered old hatreds as Vorthon crystalline forms resonated with horror at discovering their wars had served alien hunger, while even the proud shadows of Ix admitted they had been manipulated into isolation that prevented unity. which might have exposed the invasion. Holly Chen broadcast her findings on every frequency, showing how parasites operated through quantum entanglement at neural levels, creating suggestions that felt like personal thoughts, while slowly reshaping host personalities. Toward maximum conflict generation for easier feeding, council fleets turned on each other as uninfected crews fought desperate battles against those still under parasitic control, while on 1,000 worlds uprisings began that would reshape galactic civilization if they could survive the death throes of an empire built on lies. Lisa felt each mind she touched as infected leaders faced the truth of their enslavement, and she offered them clarity in final moments as parasites burned out neural pathways rather than surrender control, because the entities could not comprehend consciousness that chose connection over dominance. The strain of existing in multiple locations simultaneously pushed beyond what consciousness was meant to endure. But Lisa had been preparing for this moment since before the chamber sealed, and Shadow Men drew on connections to dimensions where different rules applied. Grace Evans led the growing fleet of liberated vessels, whose crews had remembered what it meant to serve by choice rather than compulsion, while beside her sailed ships from species that had been enemies yesterday, but recognized shared suffering as stronger bond than old grievances. The battle for the galaxy had become something greater than military conflict as consciousness itself went to war against forces that sought to feed on suffering, while Lisa and Shadow Men stood at the center of transformation that rippled outward through quantum foam. But the parasites had one final gambit prepared for the moment. Their control shattered as they activated protocols that would burn out the minds of every infected being, rather than allow them to live free, because if parasites could not feed, then none would survive. Lisa faced the greatest challenge of her existence as billions of minds cried out in agony, while parasites executed their spite-driven extinction protocol, and she knew that saving them would require sacrifice beyond anything she had given before. The multiplication technique stretched to breaking point as she tried to reach every dying mind simultaneously, while Shadow Man poured his strength into maintaining her coherence, despite quantum mechanics screaming that consciousness could not be divided indefinitely, without dissolution. Amy Foster on New Phoenix felt the cosmic struggle and rallied every free human to join their thoughts in support, creating a network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy, offering anchor points for Lisa to maintain her existence, despite impossible strain. The dragon roared across dimensions with sound that shattered the parasite's hold on reality, while his partner reached through burning neural pathways to offer peace to those who had never known. Their thoughts were not their own until the moment of liberation that came with death. But death was not the only option, as human chaos theory combined with elven magic and dragon power to create interference patterns that disrupted parasitic control while leaving host consciousness intact, though scarred by the experience of discovering they had been puppets. The tide turned as freed beings added their strength to the liberation network, while parasites found themselves facing united consciousness that refused to accept domination and chose connection over isolation, despite the pain of transformation from slave to free. The revelation of parasitic control spread through the galaxy faster than light itself, as species who had warred for generations suddenly understood their hatred had been manufactured by entities that fed on suffering while wearing the faces of trusted leaders who believed they acted freely. Lisa stood before the Emergency War Council that formed spontaneously on Prime Station as representatives from every major species gathered in halls that had hosted lies for centuries, while the architecture itself seemed to recoil from truths being spoken, where deception had ruled. Her elven heritage carried weight beyond words as she explained how parasites operated through quantum entanglement at neural levels, creating suggestions that felt like personal conviction, while slowly reshaping host minds toward patterns generating maximum conflict for easier harvest. The Vorthon delegation, with their crystalline bodies resonating at frequencies that revealed hidden memories, discovered their great wars had been orchestrated feeding cycles where billions died believing in causes that served only to satisfy alien hunger, caring nothing for justice or victory. Even the proud shadows of Ix, who dwelt partially outside normal space, found traces of manipulation in their collective consciousness that had guided them toward isolation and xenophobia, preventing the unity that might have exposed the silent invasion proceeding through bureaucracy. Grace Evans commanded the human fleet above Prime Station as living proof that chaos could resist parasitic control, while her crews shared techniques developed secretly over generations for maintaining mental independence through deliberate randomness that disrupted pattern recognition. Lisa demonstrated the multiplication technique, warning that without her millennium of preparation, attempting such division would shatter consciousness beyond repair, making it a weapon of absolute last resort that demanded sacrifice. Few could survive. The parasites responded to exposure by accelerating burn protocols as infected hosts began experiencing neural cascade failures that would kill within hours, unless a solution could be found to sever parasitic connections without destroying the minds they had infiltrated. Holly Chen worked with scientists from every species in her laboratory as barriers of classification and prejudice fell away, revealing how knowledge had been deliberately fragmented to prevent synthesis that might threaten parasitic control over specialized ignorance. The solution emerged from unexpected combination, as Vorthan crystalline matrices merged with human chaos theory and X-shadow manipulation, creating interference patterns that disrupted parasitic quantum entanglement while leaving host consciousness intact though scarred. But implementing the cure required reaching every infected being simultaneously, which meant recreating the multiplication feat on galactic scale, using volunteers, who understood most would not survive yet stepped forward because freedom demanded prices worth paying. Amy Foster coordinated ground operations as resistance cells activated across thousands of worlds, securing medical facilities and protecting the infected during treatment, while Council loyalists fought desperate battles trying to preserve systems they could not admit had enslaved them. The multiplication circle formed as 10,000 volunteers joined hands around Lisa, who opened her consciousness to channel their combined will through quantum space, while Shadowmend provided the draconic framework, keeping disparate minds aligned despite impossible distances. Each volunteer experienced existence from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, as consciousness spread across space, touching infected minds with healing patterns that severed parasitic connections while offering comfort to hosts facing the agony of neural pathways burning in final spite. Lisa felt every death as parasites, chose destruction over release, taking their hosts in final feast of suffering that achieved nothing except demonstrating the fundamental difference between consciousness, seeking connection, and that existing only to consume others. The shadows of X proved invaluable as their natural existence outside normal space allowed them to anchor healing patterns in dimensions parasites could not reach, while Vorthan crystals resonated at frequencies that rebuilt damaged neural pathways faster than burn could destroy. Human chaos provided the final key, as unpredictable variations in healing patterns prevented parasitic adaptation, while the sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat that characterized humanity powered through when logic suggested surrender would minimize casualties. Kate Ramirez led fleet actions against planet killers that parasites activated in final strikes, while her crews discovered human intuition could predict targeting patterns following alien logic that ordered minds could not comprehend but chaos made clear. The cost mounted horrifically as volunteers collapsed from strain and infected beings died despite all efforts. But each success inspired others to join the healing network until the galaxy pulsed, with unified purpose transcending species boundaries. Lisa pushed beyond all limits, channeling power that would vaporize lesser beings, while Shadowmend roared defiance across dimensions at entities that thought themselves safe in spaces between reality where only will and hunger determined supremacy. The turning point arrived when freed hosts began adding their strength to the healing network, creating cascade effects spreading faster than parasites could burn through victims, while across the galaxy beings blinked in sudden clarity as foreign influence evaporated. Grace Evans accepted surrenders from former enemies, who wept with relief discovering their hatred had been manufactured, while their true selves emerged from years of subtle control that had twisted noble impulses into tools for generating conflict. The parasites attempted one final bargain through remaining hosts, offering knowledge and power in exchange for continued existence. But Lisa had seen such offers before, in other realities, knowing any compromise would merely delay inevitable betrayal. She reached through quantum foam, grasping parasitic essence itself in dimensions where physical form meant nothing, and will shaped existence according to rules older than matter. while shadowmen provided anchor points preventing escape into spaces between. The entities faced judgment from consciousness they had tried to consume, and found themselves wanting as their fundamental nature could not comprehend cooperation or creation. Only consumption, leaving emptiness while pretending satiation could be achieved through feeding. 10,000 volunteers gave their lives maintaining the healing network, as parasites died in frequencies beyond sound, while hosts either survived scarred but free or passed peacefully, knowing their sacrifice had meaning beyond personal survival. The galaxy breathed free for the first time in centuries, as the last parasite dissolved into quantum foam that could no longer support consciousness based purely on hunger, while freed beings looked at each other with eyes unclouded. Seeing potential, Lisa collapsed as multiplication ended, and consciousness contracted back to singular existence, while survivors of the volunteer circle stood guard over her unconscious form with unity, transcending species as all recognized shared sacrifice. Shadowmen curled protectively around them, while his eyes watched skies where freed fleets gathered not for war, but for the greater challenge of building something new from ruins of empire based on exploitation, disguised as Order Holly Chen, broadcast instructions for preventing future parasitic infiltration based on principles of diversity and chaos, making consciousness unpalatable to entities requiring predictable patterns while ensuring no single authority could impose uniformity. The War Council reconvened with representatives chosen by freed populations rather than appointed bureaucrats, and their first act acknowledged the debt owed to humanity whose neural chaos had provided both warning and cure for control. Amy Foster spoke for human colonies emerging from shadows to claim seats at tables where their voices had been silenced for generations, while her hand rested on dragon scales connecting past and future through present courage. The transformation brought violence as some refused to accept their hatred had been manufactured, clinging to conflicts without meaning beyond habit. But the majority chose reconciliation over revenge, recognizing shared victimhood. Kate Ramirez accepted command of the unified fleet not as conqueror, but as coordinator protecting against threats waiting beyond the galactic rim where worse things than parasites dwelt. In spaces sanity avoided while civilization recovered. The price of freedom had been paid in volunteer lives and scarred minds. But the galaxy emerging from parasitic control was stronger for facing truth about how easily consciousness could be subverted when uniformity replaced diversity. Lisa woke transformed by the ordeal as traces of every species she had touched during healing remained part of her consciousness, creating perspective, transcending individual identity while remaining fundamentally herself at core. The multiplication left marks on all survivors as boundaries between self and other became more permeable, allowing empathy that parasites had suppressed because beings who truly understood each other were harder to turn against neighbors. Shadowmen spread wings, roaring triumph across dimensions, while around him beings of every species raised voices in harmony, impossible under parasitic influence because artificial barriers had fallen, revealing common ground. Beneath differences, the galaxy stood united not through conquest or control but through. The end of parasitic control brought not celebration, but exhaustion as the galaxy counted losses measured in billions, while survivors struggled to understand who they were, without foreign influence shaping their thoughts toward conflicts that had seemed vital yesterday. Lisa lay in the medical bay of the unified command station, while her body fought to maintain cohesion after the strain of existing simultaneously across galactic distances. Because even with Shadowmen's support, the multiplication had pushed beyond what consciousness could endure. Amy Foster refused to leave her side as human medics worked alongside Vorthan healers and X-phase specialists trying to stabilize quantum fluctuations that threatened to scatter Lisa's essence across probability streams, while only her bond with Shadowmen kept her anchored. The dragon curled around the entire medical complex with his body existing partially in dimensions normal sensors could not detect while his mind reached through, their connection offering strength that transcended physical support because their bond had become foundation for galactic healing. Kate Ramirez organized relief efforts for worlds devastated by parasitic strikes, while discovering that cooperation between former enemies produced solutions neither could imagine alone as human creativity. Combined with alien perspectives, rebuilding faster than destruction had torn down. Holly Chen established the Institute for Consciousness Defense using principles learned from the crisis to ensure future generations would recognize mental infiltration signs, while maintaining diversity that made control difficult because uniformity invited exploitation by hungry forces. The transformation accelerated as beings who had lived under subtle control their entire lives discovered suppressed aspects of themselves because parasites had found certain emotions unprofitable for feeding and had edited them from host populations through generations. Grace Evans coordinated integration of human colonies into galactic society as equals rather than subjects, while her fleet served as example of how chaos and order could work together when neither tried to dominate because balance created strength. Extremes never matched. Lisa felt each mind touching hers with gratitude for freedom they had not known they lacked until its return, while her transformed nature allowed perception of connections between species that parasites had tried to sever because unified consciousness threatened their feeding. The shadows of Ix revealed hidden archives containing histories of previous parasitic incursions following similar patterns of bureaucratic infiltration, disguised as beneficial order, while slowly reshaping societies toward maximum suffering production for entities dwelling between thoughts. These records showed civilizations surviving such attacks emerged stronger through diversity, while those maintaining rigid hierarchies fell to increasingly subtle control until they consumed themselves in conflicts, feeding entities in spaces between realities. Amy organized the first interspecies celebration on New Phoenix, where humans had hidden their nature so long, while now they danced with Vorthan crystals whose harmonics created impossible music, and shadows of Ix painted hope across skies with light. But celebration could not mask work still needed, as thousands of worlds struggled with liberation aftermath, while some groups retreated into isolation rather than face vulnerability of connection that had allowed infiltration and ultimately salvation. Lisa rose from her bed against medical advice, feeling the call of those needing to see survival was possible after touching infinity, while her form flickered between states as quantum coherence fought dispersion in ways questioning identity nature. She spoke to gatherings across the galaxy through Shadow Men's dimensional projection ability, and her words carried weight beyond language, because everyone listening had felt her touch during healing and knew she understood scars. Liberation left behind. The message was simple yet profound, explaining the chamber on Avalon 7 had never contained weapons but rather potential waiting for the galaxy to grow beyond needing external saviors, because true strength came from connection. Freely chosen, Kate Ramirez proposed new galactic governance based on rotating councils, where no species could dominate while decisions required consensus through understanding rather than voting, allowing majorities to impose will on minorities holding necessary wisdom. The Vorthan contributed harmonic decision processes, finding solutions through resonance rather than debate, while humans insisted on chaos protocols randomly redistributing power, preventing any individual accumulating influence that might attract parasitic attention. Former council worlds benefiting from old systems resisted changes, reducing their advantages, while some human colonies wanted revenge rather than reconciliation. But Amy Foster spoke with combat, earned authority about futility of replacing tyranny. Lisa shared her deepest realization that multiplication had shown fundamental truth about consciousness being naturally interconnected with artificial barriers, creating separation illusion that parasites exploited, because beings knowing deep unity could not turn against themselves. Dragon flights began as Shadow Men taught selected individuals from every species how to traverse dimensions using will rather than technology, because mechanical solutions could be corrupted, while properly trained consciousness recognized and rejected parasitic influence. Holly Chen's research revealed human neural chaos was not unique but one expression of defensive diversity appearing differently across species facing existential threats, suggesting evolution recognized uniformity, dangers, and prepared natural countermeasures. The Institute expanded, including artists and philosophers alongside scientists, because defending consciousness required understanding full expression, not just mechanical function, while creative works celebrating diversity became weapons against future infiltration attempts. Grace Evans led expeditions beyond the galactic rim, establishing early warning systems against threats exploiting the rebuilding period, while crews trained in techniques combining military discipline with deliberate random elements disrupting pattern matching. Enemies. The memorial for 10,000 volunteers who gave lives in multiplication stood at New Capital Station Center, where representatives from every world could touch names written in quantum crystal, preserving not just identity, but essence. Lisa found herself becoming living bridge between species as transformed nature, allowed communication, transcending language, while shadow men served as anchor keeping her connected to physical reality when quantum dispersion threatened consciousness. Scattering. The first Institute graduating class included beings from every species working together on projects impossible under old systems where knowledge was hoarded rather than shared, because parasites understood ignorance made better food than wisdom. Amy Foster accepted appointment as human representative to Galactic Council, while maintaining connection to resistance networks never fully disbanding, because eternal vigilance against tyranny required readiness to act when freedom faced threats. Education transformation began as young beings learned alongside other species from earliest age, making diversity normal rather than threatening, while minds developed defenses against uniformity that might invite exploitation by predictable prey preferring forces. Kate Ramirez retired from military command, establishing the Academy for Strategic Chaos, where future defenders learned thinking patterns, confounding entities expecting linear logic while maintaining effectiveness, through principles emerging from apparent randomness. The galaxy settled into new rhythms as trade routes reopened, based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation, while cultural exchange flourished in ways parasites prevented, because beings understanding each other deeply were harder to manipulate. Lisa felt time growing short as quantum coherence became increasingly difficult maintaining. Despite Shadowmen's support, because consciousness stretched across dimensions could not remain stable indefinitely, without fundamental transformation changing her nature. She made final preparations with Amy and other leaders, ensuring structures existed, maintaining diversity and connection without requiring external saviors, because the greatest gift was proving every species contained resistance potential, remembering true nature. The choice came as Shadowmen offered complete essence merger, creating new existence form, transcending individual identity while maintaining purpose, driving them both through millennia struggling against forces reducing consciousness to commodity. 10,000 beings gathered as Lisa made her decision with representatives from every world touched by liberation, while combined will created quantum resonance, preserving this moment across probability streams as reminder of freedom prices. She accepted transformation not as death but evolution, while consciousness merged with Shadowmen's, becoming something new existing simultaneously in all dimensions, where thought touched matter and will-shaped reality according to principles older than physics. The merger created light explosion painting, new constellations across the galaxy, while every conscious being felt transcendent awareness. Touch reminding them separation was illusion and unity required no uniformity, because diversity strengthened rather than weakened Amy. Foster spoke words echoing through history, declaring formal galactic alliance establishment based on voluntary association and mutual benefit principles, while stars themselves seemed to pulse, recognizing consciousness, choosing connection over isolation.